Maybe you've heard this age-old saying before. If you don't use it, you lose it. Well, maybe that's not entirely true, but for fantasy football purposes, it may be true. And if you don't use your mind, you might end up losing your league. And that's why you got to keep yourself sharp, ready to go, and committed to winning your fantasy football league. And every single year, you're going to run across these people that make mistakes that keep them from winning a championship. So that's why I've got 10 reasons why you could lose your fantasy football league this year, and you don't want to make any of these mistakes. Headliner Nation, Kyle back with the Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully everybody is doing well out there today. And on this episode of the Fantasy Headliners, we're going to be talking about 10 mistakes that you'll make this year to lose your fantasy football league. Wait a second. Pump those brakes. You're actually not going to be making those mistakes because you're watching this video right now. So you know going into the season that you won't be messing up by doing these things. But you know, here on the Fantasy Headliners, we love to do a bunch of different content, dive deep on players, give you specific players, rankings, all of that. But we also just love to talk some strategy and tips and tricks. And that is what this video is going to be all about. Because let's face it, every single league that we're in, we all have one or two people, they just lose every single year, right? Well, more than likely, they're making one or more of these mistakes, and that is the reason that they are losing. But before we jump into all the content, do not forget, if you love what we're doing here on the channel, the Fantasy Headliners over on Patreon has even more exclusive content, podcasts, articles, more videos, DFS content, everything that you could possibly want to get more from the Fantasy Headliners and run your leagues this year. For as little as $5 a month, you can get access to all of our extra content. And if you want to do some DFS, you can do that for only $20 a month. I just took down my first GPP contest this weekend. Thanks to Chris Kennedy, who is our DFS guy. Had some great picks this weekend as usual, and I was able to bring home the moolah. And if you want to do the same thing, head over to Patreon, and you are going to be able to do that as well. But let's go ahead and jump into all the content and again, talk about 10 mistakes that people will make to lose their fantasy football league in 2020. All right, here we go. The first points that I want to talk about, I basically have like 4 subsections with different points under them. But the first section I want to talk about is the mental game. Mentally preparing yourself every single week, every single season to get ready to win. Okay? Because that is a mistake a lot of people make. They don't mentally prepare for the season. If you go into the season basically saying, I'm going to have some fun, this is what I'm going to do, not really take it serious or do your homework, whatever it may be, you're never going to win. And that's okay. Some people just, love to jump in leagues with friends, maybe do a draft. They don't take it that serious. But if you're here and you're watching this channel, more than likely, you want to win your fantasy football league. You don't want to lose. So mentally prepare yourself every single year by getting ready to go out there and win. Okay? That's number one. Okay? And it seems like not that big of a deal, but it is, because some people just don't get ready to go out and dominate their leagues. Also, though, never give up on a season early. A lot of times I see people talk about, oh, I lost the first couple of weeks, or I had a couple of injuries in the preseason. There's no way I can get through this. And they just bounce. They're just done for the year. They give up. They don't prepare. They don't look at anything. They don't take it serious the rest of the season. Don't give up on your season early, okay? Just because you lose 1 or 2 weeks does not mean that you can't make some moves, that you can't get yourself in position, and that you can't make a playoff run. Because this is what I always tell people. Get me in the playoffs, and anything can happen, okay? Get me to the playoffs, have my roster ready to go at that point, and I can definitely take down a league. So that's what you need to be doing as well. kind of going off of the mental game, another section I want to talk about is overthinking it. As fantasy football owners, we are constantly overthinking what we should be doing. And this was something that I saw brought up several times on my must-have video last week about Josh Jacobs and Joe Mixon. People gave up on Joe Mixon at the start of the season within a few weeks. And I get why. It was awful, right? He didn't have that great of a season. I talked about it in the video. But it wasn't just because he was playing bad. Offensive line was bad. Ankle might have been bothering him. Lots of different issues led to his slow start. When you spend significant draft capital on a player and they start off slow, you need to stick with them, okay? Unless they're injured and done for basically the entire season, or their situation just looks awful, maybe they're getting left off the roster some weeks, they're inactive, whatever it may be. Unless that's the case, you hold on to players. Joe Mixon last year was probably being taken at the end of the first, early second round. Do not dump players that you have spent significant draft capital on. That is why I tell people you have to be ready to knock it out of the park in your first couple of rounds and ride those players, because you're just not going to get rid of them. You got to ride with them. You got to win with them. Don't go out there and just dump them away in a trade or to waivers and get something crappy in return just because you're like, oh, I'm panicking. I need to get something done right now. Sometimes you just got to ride the storm. Sometimes it'll right itself. Sometimes it'll take you down into the depths of the water. But whatever it may be, you got to hook yourself to those picks. A lot of fantasy owners worry about matchups and buys to a fault. Should we be paying attention to them? Yeah, absolutely. We should be paying attention to them. But I see a lot of owners go out there and draft really, really well. And then they get their roster and they look at it and they're like, oh, well, I've got these two players on a bye in week 10. I can't do that. I'm not going to be able to win if I do that. So I'm going to go ahead and make a trade. But the trade they make, it's a loss because all they're really focused on is getting a couple of players that can get them through that week. Sometimes a lot of owners, they look at the playoff matchup for a player and they're like, man, that playoff matchup is going to be tough. I got to get rid of him. I can't ride him. And again, they make a crappy trade because they're not interested in anything other than getting players with a better playoff roster. And sometimes I see absolute studs traded for nickels on a dime because all they're worried about is the matchups and the bye. Don't overthink it. You drafted these guys for a reason. If these guys are studs and you spent significant draft capital on them, hold on to them, okay? Unless you're getting such a good deal for other studs, there is no reason for you to be giving up on your players just because you get into the season and say, oh man, they have a tough playoff matchup. Or I have too many guys on this bye. You know what? I don't worry about buys when I draft because I'll take the loss that week. I want the strongest roster possible. And when I have that, I can make the moves through trades, free agency, waivers, whatever it may be, to get myself prepared for that. Okay? But you're drafting these guys for a reason. Do not move on from them just because you're overthinking matchups and buys. Speaking of making trades, though, the trade game. That is one area that you really need to be on your game every single season. And one cardinal sin that I see happen all the time with fantasy football owners who lose leagues is they let trades sit. They're not paying attention to their inbox or your league chat or emails or whatever it may be, and they get trades sent to them and they let them sit and then they just disappear. They're either at that point pulled back by the other owner, or you take a look at the trade later and you're like, oh man, I really wish I would have made this deal then. Whatever it may be, do not let trades sit, okay? If you get a trade offer for somebody, take a look at it. More than likely, 90% of the trade offers you are going to get, you are not going to smash accept on right away. You're going to have to be talking about them a little bit. But even if you get one of those trades that are just absolutely horrendous, don't give up on it right away. Send a counter offer. Even if it's bad, send something back where it's like, yeah, you know what? Don't really want to give up this guy. This is what I would need, okay? Don't just let the trade disappear, okay? Let them know that, yeah, you'd be willing to talk trade, but you gotta have more. And if you're really not interested in trading that player at all, then just, hey, let them know. Say, hey, I don't want to trade this player. Are you interested in anything else on my roster? Because a lot of times, if you don't have those conversations and you don't respond, you end up missing out on trades because maybe that other person was shooting way too high on purpose, just hoping for something. But maybe the deal that you could get would still be very beneficial to your team. Also, this happens a lot, and it drives me absolutely insane. When fantasy football owners don't make players available to the entire league, they make the very first trade that comes in. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have a stud, more than likely there are going to be a lot of other owners in your fantasy league that are going to be willing to pay up for them, okay? If you're sitting there and you get a deal for Alvin Kamara, and you're like, man, this is a really good deal. I like this deal. Do not hit accept right away. Do not hit accept right away, okay? Go back to the other owner and say, hey, I like this deal, but if you don't mind, I want to see if anyone else is interested in Alvin Kamara before I make the trade. If they say no, then screw it. Don't worry about it. Unless it's a deal that's just over the top, okay? Unless you're getting 2 studs in return and you're like, I absolutely can't say no to this. There is no way whatsoever. Unless it is a deal like that, you have to make him available. And if the other guy wants to back out of the trade anyway, then let him do it. Okay? Let them do it. Who cares? If they're not willing to wait around, they're not willing to make a deal with you anyway. Okay? When it comes to making trades, patience is the key. When it comes to, again, making him available to other people so maybe you get a better deal elsewhere, or being patient with trade talks. A lot of fantasy football owners say, just send me an offer. Just send me an offer and I'll shoot back a counter or whatever it may be. No. The best deals every single year come from good conversations with other owners. Okay? That is how you get the best deal, not only for yourself, but for the other team, so you can also make deals with them later. Okay? If you just go into a trade conversation and say, no, I'm not having a conversation, I don't care, this is what we're going to do. You're going to send me an offer and I'm going to send you an offer back. If we can't make it, we can't make it. If you open up and have good dialogue with other teams and you're willing to have a little bit of patience with the trade, then at that point, it can lead to more conversations down the road so you can make more trades down the road. But also when you're patient with trade talks, there's always a possibility that you can get a little bit more. If you are not 100% happy with making a trade, then you probably shouldn't take it. Okay? Sometimes you get lucky and you end up hitting the nail on the head. But other times, if you just tell the other fantasy owner, hey, you know what? I like this deal. It just doesn't quite do it for me. I want to think about it. I want to sleep on it tonight. Can you give me a little bit of time? Think about it a little bit longer. Wake up tomorrow morning and say, you know what? I want to get a little bit more of a piece out of it. So you go back to the other fantasy owner and say, hey, can I get this guy, or can I get a pick, or whatever it may be? Maybe it'll happen, okay? But again, you gotta be 100% on board with the trades that you are making. Be patient. Don't just make those trades for the heck of it. Be ready to have some trade talks. It can lead to better conversations, better trades, and even more trades down the road when you are able to develop that kind of dialogue with fantasy owners. Make sure you pay attention to your surroundings. And no, I'm not talking about if you're going for a late night stroll out in your neighborhood. I'm talking about when you are in your fantasy league and the season is going, okay? Hit that waiver wire early. Don't just skip on guys because you're like, there's no way they can sustain that. If there are guys that you can get on your waiver wire and you have extra room, then go for it. Work that waiver wire, okay? If you see something right away in week 1 that alerts you that maybe I need to have that guy on my team, go get that guy, okay? Don't just sit back and let everyone else make waiver wire acquisitions while you sit there and don't do anything. That kills rosters. When you are not able to make those moves, that kills your roster, because then when you have injuries later on or buys or whatever it may be, you miss out on those guys early in the year that were not drafted but end up having great seasons because people jumped on them to begin with because they were playing well all season long. It also hurts when you don't pay attention to inactives and injuries, okay? I don't know how many times I see in the YouTube comments where somebody says, oh man, I ended up losing this week because I didn't realize so-and-so was going to be out and I didn't get him replaced. You got to pay attention to those inactives and pay attention to those injuries as well. If you see a guy that ended up leaving a game early, or if you see a report that looks like a guy might be out the following week, pay attention to those things. Make moves to go get backups and handcuffs, okay? Pay attention to every little detail when it comes to injuries and inactives so you're not missing anything. It is always a good idea Saturday night to take a look at the injury report and see who may end up being out the next day so you can make those moves early if you need to. And another thing that fantasy owners do who lose matchups and lose fantasy leagues is when they don't pay attention to other rosters. It is really, really important that when you're going through a fantasy league and a fantasy season, that you're paying attention to the rosters around you. Who else is having injuries? Who has ineffective players? Who might be lacking at a position that you can make a trade with? Okay? Pay attention to those things. Look at other rosters. See who is maybe needing to make a deal. Maybe you ended up drafting 2 quarterbacks and one of your quarterbacks has absolutely exploded and now you have 2 top 10 quarterbacks. Maybe this guy over here or this girl over here, they don't have a quarterback. Maybe they had an injury. Maybe it's a deeper league, whatever it may be. Maybe you can trade that backup quarterback that's only going to play for you once this year for something. Maybe you can get him for like running back 3 or get him for a tight end to help you out. Whatever it may be, you can make those moves because you're paying attention to other rosters. Maybe it's a team that drafted really, really great at wide receiver and they're having a ton of issues at running back. You have no issues at running back. You're solid, but you need a wide receiver. Great trade partners there. But you're never going to know if you don't pay attention to the other rosters. If someone's dealing with a lot of injuries and you have their handcuff, maybe someone drafted Zeke. Zeke's going to be out for the next couple of weeks, but you grab Tony Pollard, okay? Make sure you're paying attention to that roster because you can just scattle on over there. Say, hey, I've got Tony Pollard here for you. I can give you a great deal. Let's work out a trade. That's why you got to be paying attention to everything going on around you, which includes those rosters. Well, there you have it, Headliner Nation. Just 10 reasons why people lose their fantasy leagues every single season. And now that you've seen this video, you will not be making those mistakes this year. But do me a favor, down in the comments below, what are some common mistakes that you see fantasy owners make? What are some issues that you see happen every single year, whether it be yourself or somebody else, that cause them to lose a fantasy league? Let us know if there's any other points that need to be brought up down in the comments below. As always, if you enjoyed the content and appreciate the work, hit that like button. If you're new to Headliner Nation, this is your first video, subscribe. Become a part of Headliner Nation today. Let us know in the comments so we can welcome you. The draft guide out isn't available. We also have got our Patreon content that's dropping all week. Make sure that you tune into those 2 things if you want more from the Fantasy Headliners to get you ready to win in 2020. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.